been with the state for 31 years, and for 26 of them, I worked the same stretch of Interstate 80 in the middle of Pennsylvania, between the snowshoe exit and the long climb where the trucks downshift, and you can hear them complaining for a mile in either direction. Most of that time, I was a rest area maintenance worker, which is a job nobody pictures when they think about the highway. People picture the troopers and the snowplows and the orange trucks. They don't picture the guy who comes in at night to mop the floors, refill the paper towel dispensers, snake the toilets when a family of 5 from Ohio decides to flush a diaper, and write down on a clipboard how many rolls of tissue went missing that week. That was me. That's still me, technically, though I'm 3 months from my pension now, and I do mostly daytime inspections. I'm telling this because I'm getting out, and I've never been able to explain it to anybody who would actually do something about it, and I'm tired of carrying it alone. I'm not a writer. I'm going to tell it the way it happened, in order, the way my father taught me to fill out a work order, what you found, what you did, what was still wrong when you left. My father did this job before me. He ran the rest areas on the same stretch, back when they were newer, back in the 70s and early 80s, before the renovation. People don't think a man can love a rest stop, but he did, in the way you love something you take care of. He knew which urinals ran, which lights buzzed, which exit had the worst trash, because of the truck stop 2 miles down that didn't have a dump station. When he died, I found his old key ring in a coffee can in the garage, and half the keys didn't fit anything anymore because the locks had all been changed. I kept it anyway. I've still got it. The rest area I want to tell you about is the westbound one. If you've driven 80 across the middle of the state, you've probably stopped there. Brick building, low roof, 2 wings men's room on the left, women's on the right, a vending alcove in the middle with a map of Pennsylvania bolted behind glass and a little brass "You are here" arrow that some kid pried half off years ago. Picnic tables out back under the pines. Sodium lights on tall poles that turn everything the color of a weak orange soda. At night, you can stand in the parking lot and hear the interstate the way you hear the ocean. This steady wash of tires, and underneath it the diesel engines of the trucks parked in the back row, idling so the drivers can keep their heat on while they sleep. It's a quiet posting. That's why I want you to understand it was a normal place. For years and years, it was the most normal place in the world. The strangeness when it came slow. And it came in through the door of a bathroom stall, and that is the truest thing I can tell you. The men's room had 4 stalls. The 4th one, the far one against the back wall, was the handicap stall, bigger with the grab bars and the wider door. That's the one. I want to be plain about it because for the first 20 years I worked there, that stall was nothing. It was the one the truckers used because it had room for their bag. It was the one I'd find a guy shaving in at 5 in the morning. It clogged like the others. It got graffiti like the others. The door latch broke like the others. Ordinary. The first thing I remember, the first thing that wasn't ordinary, was a work order. We log everything, every repair, every part, every call out. Back then, it was carbon copy, triplicate forms in a binder in the supply closet, and later it was a laptop the state gave us that took 10 minutes to start up. I was replacing the latch on stall 4th, 3rd time that year, which was a little high but not crazy. People kicked the doors and I went to write it up, and I flipped back to find the last entry on it so I could note it was a repeat. And there was an entry from a repair I didn't remember doing. Same stall. Latch replacement. The initials at the bottom were mine. My initials are RH, and there they were. RH. But the date was wrong. The date was from a winter I knew for a fact I'd spent most of laid up after a knee surgery, when a temp named Dwyer was covering my shifts. I'd never have logged a job that month. I wasn't there. I figured Dwyer wrote my initials by mistake or copied them off the form above. People do that. I closed the binder and I didn't think about it for a long time. I want to walk you through the ordinary problems first, because that's the only way you'll feel how it changed, the way I felt it. For most of a year, the only real issue with stall 4 was that it wouldn't stay locked, not the latch on the inside, the door itself. We'd had a stretch of vandalism, kids coming in off the highway, tagging the walls, breaking dispensers, and at one point somebody jammed something down stall 4's toilet, and we had to take it out of service while we waited on a part. So I locked the stall door from the outside, the way you do, with a little keyed cam lock we'd installed years back for exactly this turn the key. The door secured, hang the out of order sign, done. Next night I came in and the sign was on the floor and the door was standing open. First time I assumed I didn't turn the key all the way. It happens. I locked it again, harder, checked it twice, hung the sign back up. Next night, open again. Sign on the floor again, not torn, not crumpled, just lying there flat like somebody had set it down. Now I'll tell you something about that cam lock. To open it, you need the key, and there were 2 keys, and I had one on my ring and the other was in the lockbox in the closet, and the lockbox was locked, and I had that key too. There's no handle on the outside when it's locked. You'd have to pry the door, and the door wasn't pried. The frame wasn't scratched. The lock cam, when I checked it, was in the locked position turned like it should be, and the door was open anyway. The way a door is open when it's just hanging there, off its hinges with nothing holding it. I called my supervisor at the time, a man named Petrucci, and he came out and looked at it and did exactly what I'd have done. He figured the door was warped and the cam wasn't catching the strike. So we shimmied it. We replaced the strike plate. We replaced the whole latch assembly. We even took the door off and rehung it. And Petrucci stood there and turned that key and pulled on the door as hard as a heavy man can pull, and it held. And we both nodded, and he drove off. Open in the morning. I'm going to tell you the thing I told myself because I think it matters that you understand I'm not a man who jumps to anything. I told myself there was a draft. The building's old. Maybe the HVAC kicked on in the pressure differential with the outer door and the inner door. Somehow I actually went and stood in there with the lights off at 3 a.m. to feel for a draft, holding a strip of toilet paper up to see it move. And here's the small thing, the first small thing that I couldn't put down. The paper didn't move at the stall door. But the air right in front of stall 4 was cold, not drafty, just cold. The way the air is cold when you open a freezer, a flat, heavy cold that didn't move and didn't have a source. The rest of the room was the same temperature as always, that warm bleach and old pipe smell. Just that one spot was cold. I went home that morning and I didn't sleep. We chained it after that. I want you to know we did everything a reasonable man does. Petrucci brought out a length of hardened chain and a padlock, the good kind, and we ran it through the gap above the door and around the partition post and locked it so the door physically could not swing open more than an inch. He took a picture of it on his phone. I remember that because he laughed and said, for the file, like it was funny, like we were 2 guys solving a dumb problem. The next night, the chain was lying coiled on the floor of the stall and the padlock was still locked. Still locked. Closed shut around nothing. I picked it up and the shackle was closed, and I had to use the key to open it just to prove to myself I could. And it opened fine, smooth, like a padlock that had never been forced in its life. The chain wasn't cut, there were no marks on it. It had just come off a closed loop without being opened, which is the kind of sentence you write down and then read back and feel your stomach drop because you know what it means and you don't have a word for it. That was the end of Act 1 for me, if my life had acts. After the chain, I stopped pretending it was hardware. I started keeping my own notes. Not the state forms my own little spiral notebook. The kind you buy at the register at a gas station. I wrote down dates and times. And a pattern came out of it the way a face comes out of a photograph in a tray, slow. And then all at once. It opened after midnight, never before. I had nights I sat in the building from dark until 11:30 and the stall stayed shut, locked, behaving, and I'd start to think maybe it was over. And then somewhere after 12 I'd hear it, not a slam, nothing dramatic, just the small specific sound of a latch turning and a door easing open on a hinge that I had personally oiled. A click and a sigh. And I'd walk back there, and the stall would be open and the air would be cold. And it opened more on bad weather nights. Rain, especially. Hard rain. The kind that comes sideways off the ridge, and you can hear it hitting the high windows. Fog mornings. The white kind that sits in the low spots and the troopers run their lights through snow. The worse the weather on the road, the more reliably that door came open after midnight, and I didn't understand why a bathroom stall would care about the weather, but I wrote it down because my father taught me you write down what's true, even when it's stupid. The smell changed too, and the smell is the part I have the hardest time with, because smell goes straight into you. Most nights the men's room smells like a men's room bleach, urinal cake, wet paper, that mineral smell of old plumbing. But when stall 4 was open, the air in front of it smelled like other places. Rainwater on a road, that gray asphalt and ozone smell. Sometimes lake mud, cold and green. One night, gasoline, strong enough that I shut off the building and checked every line for a leak and found nothing. One night it smelled like a hospital. That sharp pink soap and cold floor smell. And I hadn't been in a hospital since my father died. And it put me right back in that hallway, and I had to go sit in my truck. I went to the cameras. We had 3, one on the vending alcove, one on the front entrance, one that covered the parking lot. There wasn't a camera inside the men's room. You can't put a camera in a bathroom, obviously, but the entrance camera covered the door to the men's wing, so anybody going in or coming out would cross it. I pulled the footage from the nights the stall opened. I expected to see a kid, a drifter, somebody sneaking in to do it as a prank, even though I couldn't imagine how. What I saw was nothing going in. And here's the part. On 2 of those nights, I saw something coming out. Not a person exactly. I mean, it was person-shaped. It walked on 2 legs. It came out of the men's wing and crossed the alcove and went out the front door and off camera into the lot. And the timestamp was 2:31 in the morning. And there was no corresponding figure ever entering. The camera covered that door all night. Nobody went in. But at 2:31, somebody came out walking slow, head down, wearing what looked like a long coat. And I could never get the face because the figure kept its chin down the whole way across, like a person walking into wind. Except there was no wind inside the building. I watched that clip more times than I'll admit. The thing I noticed, the thing that ruined sleep for me, was that the figure left wet footprints across the tile of the alcove. You could see them darken the floor. And the footprints went out. They didn't come in. There were never any leading toward the bathroom. They started at the men's wing door, mid-stride, like the person had already been walking for a while before the floor decided to remember them. I told Petrucci. He looked at the clip. To his credit, he didn't laugh that time. But what he said was that the entrance footage had a gap. The system dumped a few seconds when it switched recording modes at night, and somebody could have gone in during a gap. I told him there'd have to be a gap every single night for months, and always at exactly the right second. And he didn't have an answer for that, so he changed the subject to the budget and the upcoming renovation, and I understood then that Petrucci had decided not to know about this. He had 2 years to his own pension. I don't blame him as much as I used to. Here's where I have to bring in Earl, because without Earl, I'd never have found the rest of it. Earl was old when I was young. He'd worked the highway maintenance going back to before the renovation, before they tore down the original rest area and built the brick building that's there now. By the time I knew him, he was retired, and he'd come around sometimes, the way old highwaymen do, hang out at the maintenance shed, and drink the bad coffee and tell stories nobody could verify. I always liked him. He'd known my father. So one afternoon I drove out to where Earl lived, a little place outside Clearfield, and I sat on his porch and I asked him careful whether anything had ever been strange about the westbound rest area. The bathroom specifically. He got quiet in a way that told me everything before he said a word. What Earl told me was this: the brick building isn't the first rest area on that spot. There was an older one, smaller, that they built in the late 50s and tore down when they did the big I-80 upgrade, and the new building went up a little to the west of the old footprint, not on top of it, alongside it. And the old rest area had its own restrooms, of course, and Earl said that back in his day, before they tore the old one down, there'd been trouble with one of the stalls. He didn't remember it as a ghost story. He remembered it the way I'd come to remember it, as a maintenance problem that wouldn't behave. A stall that wouldn't stay locked. He said the old foreman used to chain it. He said one winter a car went off the road, just west of the rest area in heavy fog, a whole family, and they were never. And here Earl stopped and corrected himself. And the correction is the thing I want you to hear. He said they found the car. They didn't find everybody who was supposed to be in it. And then he wouldn't say any more about it, and he asked me why I was asking, and I told him, and he looked at me with an expression I didn't like, an expression like he was sorry for me. And he said, they built the new one too close. You don't build that close. My foreman told him. Nobody listens to a foreman. I asked him what he meant, too close to what? He said, to wherever that stall goes. I went to the Historical Society after that. The little one in the county seat that's open 3 afternoons a week, run by a woman named Mrs. Aldridge, who keeps the old newspapers on microfilm and was thrilled that anybody under 70 wanted to look at them. I told her I was researching the history of the rest area for the state, which wasn't even really a lie. And I went through the papers from the years Earl had pointed me at. I found the accident. December, heavy fog, a family heading west. Car left the road on the curve, just past the rest area, and went down the embankment into the trees. The paper said the vehicle was recovered. The paper listed the family a husband, a wife, 3 kids, and it said 2 were confirmed deceased at the scene, and the others were missing and presumed. Presumed. A whole separate little article a week later, smaller, back page, said the search had been called off and that the missing were presumed to have left the vehicle in shock and succumbed to the cold in the woods, though no remains were located. There was a photograph of the wife. I want to tell you I recognized her from the camera footage, that the figure in the long coat was her, but I didn't. The footage was too dark. And that would be too neat, and I told you I'd tell this true. I didn't recognize her, but I'll tell you what I did do. I wrote down the family's name, and the next week, doing my regular cleaning, going through the stall after one of its openings, because by now, I'd started checking, after every opening to see what was there, I need to back up. Because that's the other thing. The stall left things, not every time. But after some openings, I'd find an object in the stall that hadn't been there before, sitting on the floor or on the little shelf, dry or wet, depending. The first one I found, I almost threw away a child's shoe, a little canvas sneaker, the kind with a Velcro strap, faded and stiff, like it had been in water and dried. I stood there holding it. There was no child. There hadn't been a child in that building in hours. I put it in a box in my truck because I didn't know what else to do with it. And I want you to understand that I am not the kind of man who keeps a child's shoe in his truck. And I had a child's shoe in my truck for 2 years. After that, I started keeping all of them. A keychain with a brass medallion worn smooth, the kind truckers carry, with a name I won't repeat because I later found that name on a list. A pair of women's glasses, the lenses scratched like they'd been dragged across asphalt. A road map of Pennsylvania, paper, folded, with a route traced in pen and handwriting that wasn't mine, and the map was in old printing. You could tell from the road network it showed exits that don't exist anymore and didn't show ones that do, and a single license plate, an old yellow and blue Pennsylvania plate from a series they stopped issuing decades ago, with rust on the bolt holes, lying in the middle of a dry stall floor like somebody had set it down on their way through. The objects came before the people. That was the rule I worked out, the one Earl had hinted at without saying it. The stall returned things before it returned anyone. And I came to understand slowly, sick to my stomach, the more I understood it, that the objects weren't being returned to me. They were being left behind. They were the things that didn't make it through. The shoe came off, the keys fell, the map got dropped. The way things fall out of your pockets when you go through a door you weren't supposed to go through. And the family name from the newspaper. I found it because of the woman. She came to the rest area on an ordinary afternoon in spring in a sensible car, and she found me emptying the trash. And she asked if I'd worked there a long time, and I said yes. And she said she was sorry to bother me, but she was looking into something that had happened to her family a long time ago. Her grandmother's sister, an aunt she'd never met, had disappeared near here when her grandmother was a girl. A car accident in the fog. The family had always said the aunt and one of the kids had wandered off and died in the woods. But the woman, her name was Diane, said her grandmother never believed it because the aunt had stopped at the rest area first. They knew that. The aunt had mailed a postcard from the rest area that same day, the day of the fog, and the postmark proved she'd been there, alive, hours before the curve. Her grandmother had kept that postcard her whole life. And the thing that haunted her grandmother, Diane said, the thing she said on her deathbed was that the aunt had written on the postcard that she was waiting in line for the restroom, and the line wasn't moving. The line wasn't moving. I gave Diane a cup of coffee from my thermos, and I sat with her at a picnic table for an hour, and I did not tell her about the stall. I want you to know that, and I want you to know I've never been sure it was the right thing. I told her I didn't know anything, which was the only lie I told her, and she thanked me and drove west, and I watched her car go up the long climb and disappear. And then I went inside and I got the box out of my truck and I went through it, and there were the women's glasses scratched. And I thought about an aunt waiting in a line that wasn't moving, and I had to sit down on the floor of the men's room with my back against the cold wall. Here's what I finally came to think the stall is. And I want to say plainly that I don't know, and the brief of my own understanding is full of holes, and that's on purpose because I never got to see the whole thing, and I don't trust anyone who claims they did. I don't think it's a door to hell. I don't think it's a monster's den. I came to think of it the way Earl said it, like a broken piece of highway. You know how the interstate has on-ramps and off-ramps, and you know how sometimes there's an old ramp they closed, barricaded, a stub of road that goes nowhere that used to connect to something that isn't there anymore. I think the stall is like that. I think the old rest area, the one they tore down, sat on a spot where the road and the time around it didn't get shut down properly. They demolished the building, but they never closed the ramp. And when they built the new building too close, they built it right up against that open ramp. And one stall ended up sitting on it. And the ramp still runs after midnight. In bad weather, when the road is at its worst, and people are scared and tired and pulling off to use the restroom and stand in a line, I think that's when the old off-ramp opens. And I think it takes people the way an off-ramp takes a car that drifts onto it without meaning to, not killing them, routing them, sending them onto a stretch of highway that doesn't exist anymore at a time that's already over, with no way back to the road they were on. The aunt didn't wander into the woods. She took the wrong exit. She's still waiting in a line that isn't moving. And the line isn't moving because it goes through a door that only opens one way. And the things that fall off of people as they go through the shoes, the keys, the glasses, the plates, those wash back up on my side like debris on a beach, because debris is lighter than people and the current can't hold it. The lock, I finally understood, was never to keep people out. It was to keep the highway from taking people in. My father knew, I'm sure of it now. His initials are on repair tags, going back to before I started, tags for that stall, latch after latch, chain after chain, and I used to think it was just because it was a high-traffic stall that broke a lot. But I found his old work logs in the state archive, the carbon copies, and on the bad weather nights, the fog nights, my father had logged himself on site. Overtime, off the book sometimes, hours that didn't match the schedule. He wasn't fixing a latch. He was standing watch. He was making sure that on the worst nights, when the off-ramp was most likely to open, that stall stayed locked and nobody wandered in. He never told me. He let me take the job thinking it was about mopping floors. Maybe he thought it had been handled. Maybe he hoped the renovation would close it. Maybe he just couldn't find the words, the same way I couldn't find them for Diane. We're not men who have the words. We have clipboards. So here's the choice I had to make, and here's the cost. And then I'll stop because the rest isn't mine to explain. The state finally scheduled the renovation. They've been talking about it for years, but now it's funded. They're going to demolish the brick building and put up a new welcome center, bigger, with a sheet-style food court and electric vehicle chargers and a whole new restroom block. And the plans, which I've seen, put the new restroom block right over the old footprint, right over the stub of the closed ramp, closer than ever. My supervisor now, Petrucci's gone. It's a younger guy, sharp, decent, named Okafor. Wants the existing problems cleaned off the books before the state inspectors come through ahead of demolition. He doesn't want a binder full of work orders for a stall that won't stay locked. It looks bad. It raises questions. He asked me, friendly, to consolidate the maintenance file and lose the noise, erase the record, let them tear it down with nobody knowing there was anything to know. I could do that. It would be easy. I could shred my own notebook, dump the box of objects in a landfill 2 counties over, sign off on a clean file, take my pension and drive away, and let them build the new restroom block right on top of an open off-ramp, and let it become some other tired man's problem in 20 years, except worse, because they'll have built it bigger and busier and closer. And the line that isn't moving will run right through the middle of a food court. Or I could tell somebody who could stop the renovation, except there's nobody. You can't put this in a report. I tried once to write it up straight, just the facts, the chain, the footprints, the cold air. And I read it back, and it read like a man who needs help. And I deleted it. Diane would believe me, but Diane can't stop the state from building. Earl's dead now. Okafor would lose his own pension if he carried this up the chain, and got laughed out of a meeting. So here's what I did, and it's small, and it's the only thing I could think of that my father would have recognized as the job. I didn't erase the file. I added to it. Quietly, over my last months, I wrote up every opening, every object, every footprint in dry maintenance language. Stall 4 door, found unsecured at 0231, despite cam lock engaged. Cold air anomaly noted. Foreign object recovered, logged. And I put it all in the binder, the real binder. The one that has to be turned over to the demolition contractor and the project archive by law. I made it part of the permanent record. Not as a ghost story, as a maintenance history. So that when they pour the new foundation, somewhere in a file box there's a document signed RH, just like my father signed his, that says this stall does not stay locked, and that the cost of ignoring that has a number, and the number is people. I left the box of objects too, sealed and labeled, in the supply closet with a note that they are recovered property and not to be discarded. The license plate, the glasses, the little canvas shoe. I did one more thing, and this is the last thing, and it's the thing I think about. On my last overnight, the last time I'll ever have the keys, I went into the men's room after midnight, and I locked stall 4 with the cam lock, the way I've done 1,000 times. And I stood there in the bleach and rainwater cold, and I waited. And at 2:17, the deadbolt turned by itself, slow, the way it always does. And the door eased open, and the cold came out, and it smelled like wet road. And I locked it again. I know it won't hold. I've never once gotten it to hold. But my father stood watch on the worst nights for years, knowing it wouldn't hold, and he did it anyway, because locking a door that won't stay locked is still the job, and somebody waiting in a line that isn't moving might get one more turn of a bolt between them and the wrong exit. I locked it and I left, and I handed in my keys, and I'm out now. 3 months early. I told them my knee. The new building goes up next spring. I drive past sometimes on my way to nothing, and I look at the old brick rest area sitting there in the orange light, waiting to be torn down. And I think about the binder in the closet with my initials in it, and I think about the next man who'll get this posting in 20 years and won't know any of it until he flips back through an old file looking for a repeat repair and finds an entry he doesn't remember writing. Because that's the thing I never told you. And it's the thing I can't get past, and it's why I'll never really be free of that place. Last week I drove out to look at the building one more time before they fence it off. I wasn't supposed to be in there. But the door was open, the building door, the front propped, like a contractor had been in and out. So I went in, and I went back to the men's room out of habit, and stall 4 was standing open, the way it always is, and on the floor, dry. In the middle of the tile, somebody had left a brand new state work order. Printed, crisp, dated for a day that hasn't happened yet, next spring, after the demolition for a building that won't exist by then. It was a latch replacement. Stall 4. The initials at the bottom were mine. I'm 3 months retired and I never wrote it.